We launched a couple of interesting shows. What's encouraging for a platform such as ours, which is Eros Now, right? The difference is we're not Saas Bahu content, which is on catch up to be watched daily, right? So for us, it's important that the experience on the smart TV gives the real effect of watching in-home or family content.
Hi Ali, welcome to Mashable Outreach.
Hi Siddharth, how are you? Thank you for having us.
It's been raining cats and dogs in Bombay. Are you all right?
I'm perfectly well. How are you?
All well, trying to pivot, I think, is the strategy during lockdown throughout.
Uh,
Nobody really anticipated the kind of thing that we were going into, like with the lockdown or with the pandemic. How well prepared were you or Eros as a team?
I think what is advantages about businesses such as ours, right, which is predominantly a digital business. I'll talk more in terms of the teams, and then I'll talk more from a consumer perspective. So I think because we work with Zoom and Blue Jeans and Teams and a lot of the kind of so-called video calling apps we work with around the world, so that physicality per se at some level is great for the business, but I'm just saying that it is something that we were used to also living the other option in terms of how do we connect with colleagues and do business virtually, right? Because Eros Now is globally distributed. We deal with partners say, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in the US. So it's not possible for us to continue to make so many physical trips, right? So I think even technology teams, in terms of coordinating with developers in different parts of the world, they were already used to using channels like Slack, used to using GitHub. So I think that culture was seeped into us as an ecosystem on the digital side of the business, where we were already, I guess, partially operating online. So I think from that particular regard, from a team perspective, it was pretty much a snap-on, snap-off. I think there is an emotional component of teams missing each other on an open floor setup. So the team rallied quite well. It were a few 24-hour kind of overnight sessions that were done to kind of make sure that we are up and running quickly.
I would like to say that in the country we were seeing a growth, right, with the kind of consumption that OTTs were getting, and maybe exponential for some, maybe not. Do you think the pandemic has sort of accelerated that process?
Absolutely right. So we were anticipating this kind of a growth. See, I think there are two components here when you think about it, right? One is if you simplify it from a consumer's perspective, you are watching television channels. You then suddenly realize that, okay, I'm not getting new content on TV. The reruns really don't have too much of an effect, or maybe you don't want to watch Ramayana and Mahabharat. What do? Let's go to an OTT and explore. Then suddenly you realize, oh, there is so much content. Oh, it's not that difficult to use. Oh, there was only inertia that kind of existed. So I think at a psychological level, consumers have chosen to opt in for an OTT approach because there is diversity and depth of programming, and there's a lot more options available, right? So rather than being told what to watch at 9 p.m. every weeknight, you can then go and explore. During a recession, entertainment consumption goes up drastically, right? So people have a little more free time, and hence binging then suddenly becomes the so-called new norm. What's encouraging for a platform such as ours, which is Eros Now, right? The difference is we're not Saas Bahu content, which is on catch up to be watched daily, right? So for us, it's important that the experience on the smart TV gives the real effect of watching in-home or family content. Two things. One is obviously the increased consumption on the mobile device was a key kind of change. The other change was our growth on smart TV, which we saw a good change. We had almost a 2x growth in 2019. That got supercharged also because of the pre and the post lockdown. So I think both those things are very advantageous for an industry such as ours.
Could you sort of quantify or give me a percentage in the kind of increase that you've seen in the viewership? And do you think you were lucky because you were just about to rekindle and have this new sort of a proposition come into the market right before?
No, so I think because we measure multiple metrics, and I give you like a broad number, anywhere between 70 to 100% increase in terms of the pre and the post. The metrics that we measure is looking at session times, looking at repeat viewership. We launched a couple of interesting shows. I don't know if I've spoken to you about it, but we launched a show with Raj and DK, the same guys who made Family Man. It was a show called The Viral Wedding, right? So then suddenly we saw another peak. There's a very funny show called Metro Park with Ranveer Shori. It's about a quintessential Gujarati family in a suburb of New Jersey, and you're smiling, so I can tell you that you've seen the rectum scan show. That itself, we launched the so-called 1.5 version, which is the quarantine edition of that. So that was also that. So that several things that we've done in this due course in terms of resurfacing our catalog, launching some interesting shows, have kind of made sure the kind of the trajectory that we picked up doesn't kind of fall over over the last 3 months.
How did you go about, and because it could be tricky, right? Sort of maintaining quality, because that seemingly becomes paramount with content, with this sort of content.
I don't think, see, a fiction show with the kind of pre-production and the planning that we do, a live action shoot, is a very different ballgame, right? There's multiple cameras set up, the kind of art that we use. I don't think you can ever replicate that. There is some technologies that we're working on to be able to look at how we're able to bridge that gap. Where we compensate for production quality, we have to be smarter in terms of our writing, our dialogue delivery, potentially don't go as long, so make it snappier, still maintaining a certain quality then in the edit and post-production. So that's the way we try to balance it out.
I also find it very interesting for the kind of content pieces you've picked up, because there is seemingly a larger, almost international perspective attached to it. Like, is that a conscious effort that you've taken with the content?
Our kind of pedigree came for how we developed the theatrical market outside of India. Right? That continues still to be a strong kind of foothold of the company. And that's the legacy we haven't let go in our international business. Right? So if there is certain pieces of content that we believe will have significant amount of viewership outside of India, it also allows us to kind of bind this so-called global Indian universe nicely, right? And we then look for certain projects that we believe will also have a certain amount of an international kind of flavor to it, which will also appeal to those audiences. So there are specific stories that then get picked up, and for obvious reasons, because we're kind of catering to the global Indian.
Initially, we saw a lot of, I don't know if we should call it inferior or the content being picked up by OTTs, and then eventually we saw more curated kind of content come in. What do you have to say about that? I mean, was it like a dumping ground before, and it has now become a much more refined space?
I've been in this business for a long time, right? I was in YouTube back in 2012-13 when we looked at a lot of TV channels. YouTube is a great destination for music video in general, but it was a great platform for TV broadcasters to also look at catch-up content. So the problem is that we think about it from a business perspective, whilst we should be thinking about it from a customer perspective. The key shift was from a slightly older demographic and more women-centric programming to more gender-neutral programming to more newer, interesting niche stories, right? So what it did was it kind of allowed for content creators to look at what are the stories that we should experiment with, what are the spaces that we should establish, focus on the quality of the writing of the content. So I think it's brought a lot of good rigor. And the good thing is that it challenges the creator to be then responsible to the customer for the kind of content that's dished up.
Second part to that was because we spoke about data and how, sometimes as people of the business or on the business side, we tend to reverse engineer the kind of mathematics storytelling. How much of that still exists?
Data should be used to be a guiding light or guiding principles. Look for interesting nuances or trends that are coming up. Look for like drop-offs, why drop-offs are happening, and some consistency. So I think it's a combination of how you use data, and it's a combination of how you use some consumer research based on the data then to derive some actionable intelligence. And no data will be able to tell you how to be futuristic. I think there is that combination of the balance between what data cue points you take to what customer research you do to where you believe you want to take your brand and business.
You increasingly want the viewers, but then some OTTs always tend to go into bringing nudity and abusive language, and Eros we've seen is like a family approach to an OTT, and there is not an extensive side of that.
I worked in MTV back in the day, right? It's important where you're not transactional with the user, where you don't become from what they call is show to show. It's not about, I like one show, I don't like one show. How do you develop a certain culture or a certain core attribute? I'm saying one core attribute that the customer understands. So because the legacy came from driving films, and films were family-centric content and family-centric audiences, that's the slice, right? There are two simple slices. One is, how do we look at high quality of production, again coming from the film legacy? How do we look at more slightly family orientation? So again, that comes from the film legacy. So there might be some edgy stuff that we've done, like even things like Smoke or things like Flip. But if you see a lot of the stuff that we did, whether it was Side Hero or Metro Park or a lot of these other stuff, is more skewed to the family audience. So we'll also kind of stretch our boundaries.
Who do you see as competition? Because for me, I seemingly see Eros now existing in a different space altogether in terms of the competition analysis.
Okay, so I think everybody is competition and everybody is contributor, right? Because it's screen time. So if you're taking away from my screen time, technically you're competition at one level. At another level, competition is great because every new show, every incumbent launches attracts potentially 1 to 1 million new viewers. That expands the larger viewership of the industry, right? So competition is fantastic because it's also investment in the development of the ecosystem. So in that particular context, competition is fabulous, and we appreciate what every incumbent has done in this space, because for every show they will not watch on their platform, they will come and watch my show. For every show they come and watch on our platform, they might go and watch another show. Something, it kind of is a give and take of sorts, right?
I have to indulge you in this debate. Theatrical versus OTT. How the two experiences drastically different for you?
A lot of the multiplex viewing audience started moving towards more of a experience-based viewing rather than just the concept of viewing, right? If I go back to my own childhood, about watching movies in theaters, life was very simple, right? You bought a ticket, you watched a movie. Sometimes you didn't have money to buy a Pepsi or a popcorn or a Coke, if I might say so, right? But I'm just saying, it was about watching that film, or with a group of friends watching the film, or watching a film with family, right? Now it's about the experience, the ambience, the Dolby, the vision, all of those things. So there's a lot more, the seat that you're sitting on, the food that you get. So it's a lot about the experience. Of economy, I think India historically has produced a lot of good content, but we will start distinguishing between what we call as celebrated and franchise IPs, and think like Avengers, think Star Wars, think massive like Disney franchises in that regard, versus content driven. Like, I don't know if you've ever, like, I've actually gone to a Star Wars opening night in the US as an example, right? It's a midnight first show on a Tuesday as an example, and there's a long line of people dressed up. So that's a celebration. It's not about watching a film, it's about the experience, about watching it with everybody else, how people are dressed up. So those will start becoming more experience driven cinema.
So do you think a post corona phase will see storytelling also include this sort of a timeline inside it? And have you been exploring some of those content pieces yourself?
So I think historically we've explored all kinds of content pieces, right? We're also the makers of movies like Vicky Donor or Tanuved's Manu, and we've done Bajirao Mastani. So it's not like we haven't gone for the 4K sheen and gloss with Bajirao Mastani versus doing like a Vicky Donor, which is a very novel concept by itself, right? A kind of new age for its time also. So I think we've dabbled on both sides, and I think as a company we want to focus more in terms of who the target audience is and what is it that we're trying to say or communicate. And I think both have their own pros and cons, if I might say so. So I don't think we're going to be choosy, picky in that regard, because we are a scale player. So we won't do one film or two films. For us, it's about 40, 50 films in a year. And how is it that we're able to get that kind of run rate? So we believe, being a studio business and a digital business, we believe that the two will choose to coexist. It's just that content creators will have multiple opportunities to decide who their target audience is, what is the kind of story they're trying to say, and which platform is better suited to tell that story. For now, what we're doing is retrofitting some of the stories for a digital or for theater. But that's because of the fact that production's been shut down, certain projects have to get off the shelf, and so on and so forth.
Eros has also gone into a very strategic sort of a relationship with BSNL. Is that to get to the tier 2, 3 kind of audiences? What's the strategy then?
Yeah, so I think whilst we talk about a lot of these kind of shows, right? The real viewership in Middle India sits outside of Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore. Right? It's actually, the masses are actually outside. It's just that, and you'll appreciate that a lot of the internet connectivity and the infrastructure was better suited in a Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai. That's where a lot of the video viewership numbers came from. That's where a lot of the internet population came from. But Eros culturally, from the time I've been with the brand and even before that, has focused on Middle India. So we actually did a research with Counterpoint last year where we came about that close to about 60% share of voice with the audience in tier 2, tier 3 is with Eros Now. Because over there, I'm not saying whether they choose to appreciate or not appreciate a Mirzapur or a Maid in Heaven, but for them, it's the Tanu Weds Manu that sails the boat. For them, it's a Bajirao Mastani that sails the boat. It's a lot of the repeat viewership on some of these that sails the boat. So there is a significant amount of hang time and affinity of products like this, which people like to watch or like to watch again. So I think our core focus as a brand has always been tier 2, tier 3. I'm not saying that a product is not for tier 1, but and we get a significant amount of viewership from tier 1, but we've always focused.
And on the other spectrum, there is the Eros Now Prime and NBC partnership. So,
Right.
where are you sitting? I mean, it's a wide spectrum.
I don't think it's a wide spectrum. I can see why historically people think it's a wide spectrum, and I'll tell you the thinking around it, right? See, people in India were driven by data that was driven through broadcast television in terms of distribution, or the recovery of theatrical revenues from screens that were allotted to Hollywood films, right? So that's what he said, oh, Hollywood works in 6 markets, 8 markets. Now, do people actually in interior India also are aware of some of the movies or some of the shows? If you actually see, Hollywood box office has actually improved in India drastically in the last 12 to 18 months. So the kind of return on some of the films has been much better. So one is appreciating good content, good programming, right? So our thinking around Eros Now Prime is obviously one is looking at how we have a little bit of a skew more on metro-centric audiences as a primary play. So whilst our previous discussion was how do we focus on Middle India, but we're not just about Middle India, we're about India, right? So how do we improve our kind of share voice per se in the top 8-10 markets? That's one aspect. The second aspect was to also look at how we are able to use technology to get a lot of the quality English programming across to the rest of the country, right? So we're working on certain R&D projects in terms of dynamic subtitles, dynamic dubbing, to try and figure out of how do we curate quality English content for the rest of the country. So there is a journey to be traveled there, and this is a direction that we felt will drive, again, paid subscriptions, and again, going back to the top of the funnel. So we're looking at a couple of spaces that we believe will be interesting for paid audiences around the country, because we believe like content can travel if we're able to kind of reduce the language barrier.
I think that's another beauty of OTT is that it's giving us content to explore in other languages and from other spaces. So we were talking about Hollywood and how the consumption pattern in India has seen a change.
Yeah, no, so I think one is Hollywood is seeing a change in consumption pattern, but we also believe that if you're able to use technology, we can get the content to travel more, right? So the belief is that can you take it beyond 8 to 10 cities, because the programming is great. Without the restrictions of a time slot or distribution nuances within it? Can we get the content to travel more and then choose and pick the right kind of, again, go back to data and kind of choose and pick the right content IPs and the right kind of content strategy also in the English side and what we believe will travel further. So I think it's a journey that we've decided to kind of invest in from an overall subscription VOD kind of business, and I believe it's a long-term play. So we're looking forward to the launch of Eros Now Prime. I think it's going to be an exciting product. And I think a lot of the work that we do on the technology side over there over a period of time, it's not going to happen on day one, but over the evolution is something that we will be able to input back into the business in a big way.
Have you guys been opening up to newer kind of pitches, and has there been a kind of online narration going on at Eros?
So writers' room sessions being done on Microsoft Teams or Zooms, pitches happening. So it's different when you look at a virtual pitch versus on ground kind of a pitch. Some of the lag in presentations and some videos lags to go through on the virtual world, we haven't solved for some of those problems as yet. But I think people are also being creative in terms of how they're doing their narratives and their pitches and their things like that. I think our efficiency levels have gone up. You know, a lot of the pre and the post banter before the meeting is reduced to more crisper 30-minute slot meetings rather than 1 hour slot meetings. So I think in general, people have become more efficient.
Ali, tell me this, as a leader and somebody who's so dynamic, how do you yourself seemingly adjust? Because you are taking care of a huge team, but then you are also a human after all. who knows about the uncertainty of the outside. So what is the kind of mental game as a person?
So thanks for being kind. I think the way, and this is a philosophy in life, right? I think, a lot of the kind of, not just in these times, but otherwise, right? You'll have a lot of kind of ancillary events happening around you. I think looking at how to be focused in terms of what the core objectives are, trying to do less but do them well is important. And then I think trying to keep a healthy balance between how you look at your state of mind, state of fitness, state of being is also important. So I think it's a combination of how you're able to identify priorities and stay clear on those objectives, and then kind of stay more mind, body, soul kind of thing in terms of how you stay fit in that regard, right? Because it allows you to be more focused and more objective driven.
All right, I think it's been amazing talking to you. Great learning.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time, Siddharth. Wish you all the best.